When we think about the mechanics of a car, we usually pay a massive amount of attention to the engine.
Right, the horsepower, the transmission, all the flashy stuff.
Exactly. Or even just, how the leather seats feel. But there is a part of the vehicle that is entirely invisible to the driver. Yet it's doing arguably the most punishing, violent work of the entire machine. I'm talking about the shock absorbers.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, because every single pothole, every bump in the road, every sudden jolt, the shock absorber takes the brute force of that impact. It compresses it, absorbs the kinetic energy, and just smooths it out so the rest of the car can glide along peacefully.
And the really fascinating part about that piece of engineering is that, well, as long as it's doing its job perfectly, you are completely oblivious to its existence.
Yeah, you just assume the road you're driving on is naturally smooth.
Exactly. It creates this illusion of a frictionless environment for everyone else in the cabin.
Right. You never think about a shock absorber until it actually breaks. And when it finally shatters from 1,000 unseen, unacknowledged impacts, suddenly the whole vehicle is violently rattling.
The driver is panicking.
Yeah, swerving, wondering why the ride is suddenly so rough, completely unaware that the only thing keeping them comfortable for the last 10,000 miles just gave out.
Wow. Yeah.
Welcome to Audio Notebook. Today, we are taking on a massive, highly detailed exploration of concept that affects, almost every social circle, every family, every workplace. Our overarching mission today is to deconstruct a psychological archetype that is so ubiquitous it's almost invisible. We're talking about the strong one, and honestly, if you're listening to this, there's a very high probability that this is you.
It's crucial we define our terms right out of the gate here.
Yeah.
Because the strong one, it sounds like a compliment.
Right, it sounds great.
It sounds like a generic personality quirk, like, being naturally organized or being the stoic one or just the person who color codes their planner. But that fundamentally misunderstands what we are looking at today.
Yeah, we are dissecting a highly complex, deeply ingrained biological and psychological survival adaptation.
Exactly. This isn't about preference. It's about hypercompetence and incredible emotional self-regulation that developed as a shield. And the tragic irony is that this shield brings an agonizing, paradoxical invisibility right alongside it.
So before we get into the literal neurobiology of this, which we absolutely will, I want you, the listener, to just consider your own daily life. Think about your text messages right now.
Yeah, look at your phone.
Are you the friend that everyone calls the second there's a crisis? Are you the emotional anchor at your workplace? The one who somehow manages the boss's temper and keeps the team from falling apart?
Or the rock of your family, mediating every dispute.
Right. And here is the real kicker. Despite having a packed social calendar, despite being constantly surrounded by people who rely on you, do you feel an exhausting, bone-deep loneliness? If that resonates, well, this edition of Audio Notebook is specifically mapped out for you.
We are going to take a very deep journey into the architecture of this archetype. We're going to trace the strong one all the way from its developmental origins in childhood trauma down to the granular neuroscience of how chronic emotional masking physically alters your brain structures.
And your endocrine system too, right?
Yes, your hormones, your nervous system, all of it. We'll examine these social dynamics that lock this behavior into place in adulthood, and finally, look at the brutal but necessary steps it takes to actually break the cycle.
Let's start with the big picture, the overarching framework, which is known as the strong one paradox.
Right.
This is the socio-psychological phenomenon where the exact traits that make you so incredibly indispensable to your friends, your partner, your family, are the precise traits that guarantee your emotional isolation. It's a closed loop.
And the engine driving that closed loop is a mechanism called social calibration. Every interpersonal relationship you have, whether it's a marriage or a casual friendship, it runs on continuous feedback loops.
So we send out behavioral signals and we get responses.
Exactly. And over time, those responses establish a baseline. Now, the strong one is constantly engaging in something called surface acting.
Surface acting, I like that term.
Yeah, they might be experiencing intense internal distress like grief, exhaustion, anxiety, but they present a flawlessly calm, capable exterior. They diffuse conflict, they read the room, and manage the emotional temperature.
And because they do this so consistently, the people observing them, they unconsciously recalibrate their baseline expectations of that person, right?
You hit the nail on the head. The people around them actually lose the ability to perceive the strong one's distress because the baseline is literally set at always fine.
It's a perceptual blind spot. The people around you aren't necessarily malicious or intentionally ignoring your pain.
Right. They aren't bad people.
They have literally been trained by your consistent behavior to assume you have an endless reservoir of capacity.
Yes.
It makes me think of a load-bearing wall in a house. You move into a place, and there's this big, sturdy wall right in the middle of the living room. Over the years, you hang heavy mirrors on it, you taint it, you lean your bookshelves against it.
You completely take it for granted.
Exactly. You completely take for granted that the primary structural job of that wall is holding up the entire second floor and the roof. It's just part of the background. But then one day, you overload it, and a tiny hairline crack appears in the drywall.
And the reaction from the homeowners isn't empathy for the wall.
Right. It's not, oh, the poor wall needs some reinforcing. The immediate reaction is sheer panic.
Because the crack threatens the integrity of their entire living space.
Yeah, they feel panic, maybe even anger. Like, why is the roof sagging? Fix the wall. And this perfectly illustrates what is known as the competence tax.
The competence tax. Yes, that is a profound sociological dynamic.
Right. So, when you are the load-bearing wall in a social system, you are systematically penalized for being capable.
In any group, a family, a friend group, a corporate team, support resources are finite. Time, empathy, active listening, they're limited commodities. Because the strong one projects a massive surplus of psychological resources, the group subconsciously decides they don't need any of the collective support.
Wow.
The group funnels all of its empathy and help toward the members perceived as more fragile, volatile, or needy. The strong one becomes the safety net for everyone else. But structurally, they forfeit their own safety net to do so.
And what happens when the strong one tries to opt out? Let's say they finally hit a wall and say, I can't host Thanksgiving this year, or I can't talk you through your breakup tonight, I'm just too exhausted.
The system rejects it.
Really?
Yeah, any deviation from their baseline strength is not interpreted as a normal human need for rest.
Right.
It's interpreted as an existential collapse of the group's anchor.
Because the group relies on them for stability.
Exactly. So a boundary set by the strong one triggers anxiety in the group. The group often reacts with frustration, confusion, or guilt tripping rather than care. The underlying message is, you are not allowed to break down. Because if you break down, what happens to us?
That is an immense amount of pressure. I mean, it means their relationships are entirely conditional on their performance. Which begs the question, how do they choose who to let into their lives?
That's a great question.
Because if every relationship taxes their competence, why don't they just seek out other highly stable people?
And this is where we see the trap of indispensability playing out in relational selection. The strong one doesn't just stumble into these exhausting dynamics. They actively, though subconsciously, orchestrate them.
They orchestrate it.
Over time, the strong one internalizes a devastating core belief. Their value as a human being is strictly tied to their utility.
Basically, I am only worthy of love if I am useful.
Exactly. If they aren't fixing a crisis, they feel completely untethered and worthless. So when they go out into the world to find partners or friends, they actively gravitate toward fixer-uppers. They select individuals who are chaotic, emotionally dysregulated, chronically overwhelmed, or highly needy.
Because if you date someone who actually has their life together, someone who manages their own emotions and pays their own bills, the strong one suddenly has no job in the relationship.
And having no job feels terrifying to them. Being needed is the only dialect of love they are fluent in. A healthy reciprocal relationship feels suspiciously calm, which they misinterpret as distance or lack of passion.
Wow.
They feel anxious because they don't know how to connect without serving. So by constantly selecting fragile partners and high-maintenance friends, they ensure they remain the perpetual emotional donor.
It guarantees they'll never be abandoned because the other person relies on them for survival. That is just tragic. They are engineering their own starvation because feeding others is the only way they know how to justify their own existence. But, I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate for a moment.
Sure. Go ahead.
Nobody is born a load-bearing wall. When a baby is born, it is universally needy. It cries, it demands, it has zero capacity to regulate anyone else. So how does a human being's wiring get so completely flipped that they believe they're only allowed to exist if they're fixing an adult?
To understand that, we have to travel back to the developmental blueprint. We have to look at the family system they were raised in. The genesis of this archetype almost universally lies in a psychological concept called parentification.
Parentification.
Right. This is a severe developmental role reversal where the normal protective boundaries between a parent and a child dissolve and the child is forced to assume developmentally inappropriate caregiving duties.
Okay, let me pause you there because I can hear the pushback from our listeners already. A lot of people are thinking, wait a minute, I grew up doing laundry. I cooked dinner for my younger siblings when my mom worked the late shift. I mowed the lawn. Are you telling me that doing chores is childhood trauma?
That is the most common misunderstanding of parentification, and it's a vital distinction. What you're describing, cooking, cleaning, taking care of practical tasks, is what clinical psychology terms instrumental parentification.
Okay, instrumental.
Now, if instrumental parentification is extreme and robs a child of their entire youth, yeah, it can be damaging. But generally, if these tasks are recognized, appreciated by the parent, and limited so the child still gets to play, instrumental parentification can actually foster a healthy sense of resilience, competence, and self-efficacy.
So making a 10-year-old pack their own lunch and watch their little brother for an hour isn't the root of the strong one paradox?
Usually no. The catastrophic damage comes from the second type, emotional parentification. This is far more insidious, largely because it's invisible. This occurs when a child is conscripted into meeting the emotional, psychological, or even psychiatric needs of their parent.
What does that actually look like in a household? Give me an example.
It looks like a mother using her 8-year-old son as her primary confidant to complain about her marriage. It looks like a daughter having to act as the mediator and de-escalate screaming matches between her parents.
Oh, wow.
Or it's the child who realizes their parent is deeply depressed, so they become the cheerleader, the therapist, the surrogate spouse. The child learns that they must manage adult moods to prevent a total family collapse.
It's like a child having to act as an emotional air traffic controller. They have to read the room before they even know how to read a book.
That hypervigilance is the key. In a healthy home, the parent is the thermostat. They regulate the temperature of the house, and the child gets to just exist in that climate.
Yeah.
In an emotionally parentified home, the child becomes the thermostat. They learn to listen to the microscopic details, the specific way a car door slams in the driveway, the heaviness of a footstep on the stairs, the slight tightening around their father's eyes. They're constantly running threat assessment, constantly. And the tragedy is they completely disown their own needs. Because if the parent is already on the verge of a breakdown, the child having a need, being hungry, being sad, needing help with homework, could be the thing that pushes the parent over the edge.
So they swallow their own needs to keep the peace. How does that warp their ability to form healthy attachments as they grow up? Because attachment theory is all about how we learn to connect in those early years.
It causes profound attachment disruption. The child's internal working model of relationships is built on a foundation of conditional safety. This usually fractures into two distinct paths of insecure attachment.
What's the first one?
The first is the anxious preoccupied attachment.
Walk me through the mechanics of that one. How does it play out?
For the anxious preoccupied strong one, their internal model dictates that love is incredibly fragile, and it must be actively earned every single day through service. They are hyper-attuned to everyone around them.
Right.
If a friend takes too long to text back, or a partner sighs heavily, their nervous system immediately interprets it as impending abandonment. They're terrified that a momentary lapse in their usefulness means they will be discarded. They literally equate resting with being rejected.
Because their original caregiver only validated them when they were being helpful. What's the second path?
The second path is the dismissive avoidant attachment. These individuals internalized a very different but equally devastating message from their chaotic childhoods. Their core belief is, no one is coming to save me.
Oof.
Yeah. They looked around at the adults in their lives, saw the instability, and realized it was actually dangerous to rely on them. So they developed an extreme, rigid hyper-independence as a trauma response.
So instead of trying to earn love by clinging, they build a fortress.
Yes. They view dependency of any kind, even asking someone to pick them up from the airport, as a life-threatening vulnerability. They will not ask for help ever, because relying on someone else is associated with profound disappointment and danger.
But both paths, the anxious overserver and the avoidant fortress, result in the exact same archetype, the indispensable strong one who is entirely alone.
Exactly.
This brings up a huge societal issue. We don't just ignore these parentified kids, we actively praise them. I've seen this happen. An 8-year-old calmly handles a crisis, taking care of their drunk parent or managing their younger siblings, and all the adults around them say, oh, look at little Michael. He is so mature for his age. He's such an old soul. He's practically a mini adult.
And that is what clinical literature refers to as the myth of exceptional maturity. The anchor child receives immense positive reinforcement for their performance, but as experts, we know this is a dangerous illusion. It isn't true maturity. It is, in fact, a developmental arrest.
I really want to unpack that. How can acting like a 30-year-old when you're 10 be considered an arrest in development?
Because true developmental milestones aren't just about learning responsibilities. They're about learning how to be a multidimensional human. These children are employing a brilliant, desperate survival adaptation. But emotionally, their development hits a wall.
Right.
They skip the foundational stage of being a child. They never learned how to be messy. They never learned how to throw a tantrum, be entirely irrational, be needy, or drop the ball.
Wow.
And most crucially, because they never did those things, they never experienced the profound revelation of being completely messy and irresponsible and discovering that their parents still love them unconditionally anyway.
Oh, wow. They missed the lesson that their inherent worth exists outside of their utility. They never got to test the safety net because they were the safety net.
Exactly. And when you operate a developing nervous system in a permanent state of crisis management, just to keep your family afloat, it doesn't just shape your personality. It fundamentally alters your biology.
Yeah.
The physical toll of this is staggering.
Okay, let's pivot to the biology, because this is where the abstract psychology meets the physical body. We are talking about literal cellular and neurological changes. Let's talk about the biological toll of being the strong one.
To understand the physical cost, we have to look through the lens of the stress alexithymia hypothesis.
Okay.
When you are chronically suppressing your own emotional needs in order to regulate your environment, which we have established is the strong one's primary operating mode, your autonomic nervous system is held hostage in a state of high chronic arousal.
The brain constantly perceives the environment as a threat matrix.
Yes, and this state ravages the HPA axis.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. For our listeners who aren't endocrinologists, that is essentially the body's central command center for stress, right? The hormone production line.
Exactly. And its primary product is cortisol. Under normal, healthy conditions, cortisol operates on a diurnal rhythm. It spikes naturally in the morning to wake you up, mobilize your energy, and get you moving.
Right.
Then, it slowly drops on a downward curve throughout the day, bottoming out at night so you can enter deep restorative sleep. But the strong one suffers from what we call a flattened diurnal slope.
Meaning their cortisol isn't dropping at all.
It stays elevated all day. Because they are masking their emotions and perpetually scanning the horizon for the next crisis, their body never gets the chemical all-clear signal to stand down.
Wow.
This creates an enormous allostatic load. Allostatic load is the cumulative systemic wear and tear on the body from chronic stress. It's like running a car engine in the red zone for years on end.
So they are swimming in cortisol, but eventually a system like that has to give out, right?
It does, and this is the cortisol catastrophe. After years or decades of overdrive, the HPA axis essentially throws in the towel. It blunts. This leads to a severe condition called hypocortisolism.
Wait, hypocortisolism, too little cortisol.
Yes, the system burns out. Your body stops producing enough cortisol even in the morning when you need it to wake up. This is the physiological mechanism behind that bone-deep exhaustion we talked about at the beginning.
Right?
When a strong friend tells you, "I'm so tired I slept for 12 hours and I still can't get out of bed," they aren't being dramatic. It is an exhaustion that sleep fundamentally cannot fix because it's not a sleep deficit. It is a literal biological shutdown of the endocrine system.
That is terrifying. The engine hasn't just overheated, the alternator has melted. And while the hormones are crashing, what is happening to the actual hardware of the brain? How does a brain process emotions when it's under this kind of siege?
This brings us to a phenomenon known as alexithymia. Alexithymia, translated literally, means no words for feelings.
No words for feelings.
Right. It is a condition where a person has profound difficulty identifying their emotions, distinguishing them from physical bodily sensations, and articulating them. Now, some people are born with this, but for the parentified strong one, it is a brilliantly adaptive, learned survival mechanism.
How so?
If your childhood environment was emotionally dangerous, your brain learned to mute its internal signals so it could dedicate 100% of its processing power to managing the external threat.
So the brain literally turns down the volume on its own pain. How does that manifest on a neurological level? Like if we put this person in an fMRI scanner, what do we see?
We see three very distinct neurological changes. First, we see a blunted amygdala response.
And the amygdala is the threat detector.
Exactly. It's the brain's emotional processing center. In these individuals, it shows diminished reactivity to emotional stimuli, like a change in someone's tone of voice. They become so numb to protect themselves that they actually lose the ability to recognize their own emotional arousal.
Right.
Second, we see decreased activity in the superior temporal gyrus, or STG, which is crucial for processing social and emotional context.
So the hardware dedicated to naturally feeling things is powering down to conserve energy and reduce pain.
Yeah,
But they still have to function in society. They still have to mediate the office disputes and comfort their friends. How do they do that if their emotional centers are muted?
they compensate. And that's the third change. Dysfunction and over-reliance on the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, and the insula.
What does that mean in plain English?
Well, in a healthy brain, emotion is a bottom-up process.
Yeah.
You experience a loss, you instantly feel sad, you cry. It's instinctual. But because the strong one has muted that bottom-up instinct, the ACC has to work overtime using top-down processing.
Meaning they have to think their way into a feeling.
Exactly. It is a highly cognitive, exhausting process. They have to logically calculate what they should be feeling based on the context rather than just naturally experiencing the emotion.
Yeah.
It's like doing complex calculus just to figure out you're upset.
Wow.
And this leads to a massive breakdown in interoception.
Interoception. The ability to sense what is going on inside your own body, like heart rate, digestion, muscle tension. I want to try an analogy here to see if I'm grasping the severity of this.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's say interoception is the dashboard of a car. The strong one is driving a treacherous, icy mountain pass. It's life or death. To avoid being distracted by flashing lights, they reach under the steering column and just rip out the wires to the check engine light, the fuel gauge, and the temperature gauge. They are completely, flawlessly focused on the icy road. They are navigating the hazards perfectly. But because they cut the wires, they have absolutely no idea they are out of oil and running on fumes.
Right.
And eventually, without warning, the engine seizes and the car just dies in the middle of the road.
I could not have painted a more accurate picture.
Huh.
That is exactly what interoceptive impairment is.
Wow.
Because they prioritized external navigation, the icy road, for decades, they literally lose the neurological wiring required to sense their own internal state. They don't realize they are starving until they have a blood sugar crash.
Right.
They don't realize they are stressed until they get a migraine that blinds them. They don't feel sadness until they are sobbing uncontrollably on the kitchen floor and don't know why. They transition from being human beings to human doings.
Human doings.
And because the brain won't process the emotional pain, the body takes the hit. They somaticize their distress into chronic tension, gastrointestinal issues, or autoimmune flare-ups.
The body keeps the score, as they say. So we have a person whose internal dashboard is completely dark. They are biologically burned out, their cortisol is flatlined, and their brain is doing calculus just to process basic emotions. But they still have to go to work. They still have a friend group. How does this invisible, catastrophic internal state play out in their social world?
It creates profound social asymmetry. When we look at the peer-reviewed clinical research on adult friendships, we see a stark, evidence-based pattern. The childhood parentification we discuss doesn't just vanish when you turn 18.
Right, it doesn't just disappear.
No, it creates highly stable but entirely toxic interactional patterns in adulthood. Specifically, studies show that parent-focused parentification, or PFP, directly correlates with adults forming deeply burdensome one-sided friendships.
Meaning they unconsciously rebuild the dynamic of their childhood. They find friends who act exactly like their demanding, fragile parents.
Precisely. They become the designated therapist of the friend group. But there's a societal myth that obscures this damage. The myth of the independent problem solver.
The independent problem solver.
Right. We look at the strong friend, the one with the great career, who always gives amazing advice, who manages their money well, and we assume, well, they have incredible coping skills. They must be immune to depression.
We confuse competence with emotional well-being. But having a great skill set for solving a logistics problem doesn't protect you from the crushing weight of isolation.
Not at all. The psychological distress they experience doesn't stem from an inability to solve problems. The distress comes directly from the lack of emotional support inherent in their asymmetrical relationships. They're solving everyone else's problems, but there's zero reciprocity.
It reminds me of the concept of emotional labor, which we usually talk about in a workplace context. You think of a flight attendant having to maintain a calm, smiling demeanor while a passenger screams at them. Or a nurse staying compassionate through a grueling 14-hour shift. Does that concept of professional emotional labor apply to private friendships?
It applies perfectly, and it is a phenomenal lens through which to view this. The strong friend engages in continuous surface acting within their own private social circle.
Ah, surface acting again.
Yeah, they are smiling and offering cheerful, measured advice while they are internally screaming for a break. They suppress their own exhaustion to validate a friend's minor inconvenience. This creates a state known as emotive dissonance.
Emotive dissonance, the friction between the emotion you actually feel and the emotion you were forced to display. I imagine that gap requires a massive amount of calories to maintain.
It is a massive energy drain. If we apply the conservation of resources theory to this dynamic, we understand that human psychological resources are finite. Emotional labor depletes these resources rapidly. Okay, so normally how does that work? For a healthy person, they expend emotional energy helping a friend, and then a few days later, the friend helps them refilling the tank.
But for the strong one,
Those resources are being drained at an alarming rate, and the reciprocity is completely absent. They are structurally positioned in a way that makes refilling the tank impossible.
they're essentially standing in the desert, constantly offering sips from their own canteen to everyone walking by, but nobody ever stops to ask if they are thirsty.
And even if they wanted to ask for water, their position makes it incredibly difficult. We call this the curse of network centrality.
The curse of network centrality, explain that. It sounds like a social mapping concept.
It is. If you draw a map of their social network, the strong friend is the central hub. All the other nodes, the various friends, family members, colleagues, connect directly to them. Everyone routes their crises through the hub.
Right.
Now, sociologists like Irving Goffman talk about the idea of front stage and backstage behaviors. Front stage is where you perform for the world. Backstage is where you drop the act, take off the costume, and just breathe. Because the strong friend is the central hub, they have no backstage.
They're always on stage. Every relationship is a performance of strength.
Exactly. They are structurally necessary to keep the entire network functioning. But, as a result, they are personally, intimately unknown. No one knows the fragile, exhausted person behind the mask.
It is such a bizarre, heartbreaking paradox. You are describing a person who is the absolute center of attention. Their phone is constantly buzzing. Their weekend is booked solid with people who ostensibly love them and want to be around them, yet they are fundamentally starving to death emotionally. What do we even call that kind of isolation? Because it certainly doesn't look like what we typically picture when we hear the word loneliness.
It doesn't look like typical loneliness, and that is exactly why standard interventions fail them so completely.
Yeah.
If the strong one finally admits they are struggling and goes to a well-meaning but uninformed therapist or reads a standard self-help article, the advice for loneliness is almost always go out and meet more people, join a book club, try online dating, expand your network.
Which is the absolute worst possible advice. You are telling someone who is drowning in water to go find a bigger ocean. They already have too many people draining their energy.
Exactly. Their loneliness has absolutely nothing to do with headcount. To truly understand their isolation, we have to look at the foundational framework developed by sociologist Robert Weiss, who identified three distinct qualitative types of loneliness.
Okay, let's break Weiss's framework down. What is the first type?
The first is social loneliness. This is a quantitative deficit in group belonging. It's the obvious kind of loneliness. Imagine someone who just moved to a brand new city for a job.
Right.
They don't know their coworkers yet, they have no friend group, their phone isn't ringing. They lack a social circle. Now, the strong one rarely, if ever, suffers from social loneliness. As we established, they are the life of the party, the central hub, the indispensable office anchor.
Right. They have a massive surplus of social contact. So if it's not social loneliness, what is the second type?
The second is emotional loneliness. This is the qualitative absence of an intimate figure who truly understands, sees, and cares for their inner life.
Wow.
This is the defining hallmark of the strong one. They are socially hyper-present, but emotionally entirely invisible. They have a dozen people they can call to help those people move a couch or draft a resume or navigate a divorce.
Yeah.
But they do not have a single person they can call when they themselves are crying on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m.
Socially present, emotionally invisible. That is a gut punch. They are surrounded by people who love what they do but have no idea who they are.
And what is the third type?
The third is existential loneliness. This goes even deeper than emotional isolation. It is the core, fundamental, haunting belief that one's true self is inherently unreachable by others.
Unreachable.
It is a feeling of being fundamentally separate from the rest of humanity. It's the sensation of observing the human race from behind a pane of glass, knowing you can never truly be a part of it because your fundamental nature is to serve, not to belong. I keep visualizing this emotional and existential loneliness, like living in a police interrogation room, standing behind a massive one-way mirror. You are standing in the dark.
Oh, wow.
You can see everyone on the other side of the glass in the brightly lit room so clearly. You anticipate their needs, you watch their lives play out, you know exactly what they're going to do next, but when they turn and look toward you, they don't see you.
Right.
All they see is the mirror. They just see their own reflection. They see their own needs being perfectly reflected and met by you.
That is an incredibly powerful metaphor. The calibration of their social network has built that mirror. People are so deeply conditioned to the strong one being fine, capable, and bulletproof that they literally do not possess the perceptual framework to notice when the strong one is in distress.
Right?
Even if the strong one hints at it, the network deflects it. This leads to a phenomenon clinical literature refers to as involuntary loneliness as exclusion.
Exclusion. But we just established they're invited to everything. How can they be excluded?
Because they are invited to perform, they are not invited to be. The transition from a parentified caretaking child to a hyper-responsible adult leaves them feeling deeply alienated.
Right.
They look around at the world and realize that society has built 1,000 places for them to work, to fix, to mediate, to rescue, and to stabilize. But there is absolutely no place, no relationship, no room in society where they are allowed to just be. They are excluded from the basic human experience of resting.
So if living behind that one-way mirror is so agonizing and they are so biologically and emotionally exhausted, well, this brings up the most frustrating question for anyone watching from the outside.
Let me guess. Why not just ask for help?
Exactly. Why don't they just shatter the glass? Why not just pick up the phone, text a friend, and say, hey, I'm actually really not okay today. I am dropping the ball. I need you to come over, bring takeout, and take care of me.
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Why not just ask for help? And to answer that, we have to examine the identity trap. And we have to understand how their specific brain architecture processes the threat of vulnerability.
Let's start with the identity trap. Why is dropping the ball or admitting defeat so impossible for them?
Because of a psychological concept called the architecture of fusion.
The architecture of fusion.
Right. For a healthy individual, being strong or being helpful is a behavior. It's a hat they wear. They can take the hat off at the end of the day. But for these individuals, they don't just do strong things. Strength is who they are. Their entire self-concept, their fundamental identity is completely fused and tangled with their utility.
So it's not, I am doing a helpful thing. It's, I am only a person if I am helpful. The action and the identity are indistinguishable.
Precisely. And this fusion creates immense cognitive rigidity. For a secure person, forgetting to text someone back or dropping a ball at work or needing a mental health day is just a mistake. It's a normal human limitation.
Yeah.
For the strong one, less than perfect performance is not a mistake. It is perceived as a total catastrophic failure of personhood.
That's intent.
Furthermore, this leads to profound emotional foreclosure. Because they had to adopt the caregiver mold so incredibly early in childhood, they foreclosed on their own identity development. They often don't have passions, hobbies, or dreams that are separate from serving others. They don't know what they like to do just for fun.
They literally don't know who they would be if they took off the armor. If they aren't the savior, they are a void.
And so that armor becomes the prison of invulnerability.
Yeah.
Vulnerability isn't just uncomfortable. It is viewed as literal self-annihilation.
The self-annihilation.
Yes. They deeply fear that if they stop performing, if they set a boundary, they will be perceived as selfish or a burden. And we have to remember the inner child that still drives their nervous system. To that child, being a burden equals abandonment, and abandonment equals death.
So they endure the exhaustion, the flattened cortisol, the isolation, because their brain believes the alternative is literal annihilation.
And in extreme, prolonged cases, this evolves into a state of moral masochism.
Moral masochism, what is that?
This is a very dark turn, where suffering is actually equated with moral worth. They begin to unconsciously believe that love is only valid, real, and earned if it involves self-erasure and endurance.
Oh, wow.
If a relationship is easy, if it doesn't require them to bleed, suffer, and sacrifice, it doesn't feel like real love. They become addicted to the nobility of their own suffering.
That is incredibly heavy. But you mentioned earlier that this resistance to help isn't just psychological framing, it's a literal threat response in the brain. Walk me through the mechanics of that. Let's say a friend actually does notice the mirror, shatters it, and offers genuine, unconditional help. Why does the strong one violently push it away?
We call this the amygdala hijack of receiving care. For the strong one, reaching out for help or accepting care when it's freely offered does not feel like a relief. It doesn't feel like a warm hug. It feels biologically dangerous.
Wait, someone being nice to them, offering to cook them a meal or listen to their problems feels dangerous? How is that possible?
We have to trace it back to their developmental blueprint.
Yeah.
Their early childhood survival depended on holding things together, hyperindependence, and never showing weakness to volatile parents.
Right.
The brain literally encoded the act of needing others as a lethal risk because the people they needed were unstable, dangerous, or punishing. So fast forward 30 years. A partner or a friend says, "You look exhausted, let me take care of you today. Sit down, I've got this."
And what happens?
The amygdala, the brain's primitive threat detector, runs a lightning-fast scan.
Yeah.
It asks, is this vulnerability a threat? And based on a lifetime of historical data, the amygdala screams, yes, danger, do not let your guard down.
The alarm bells go off, the fortress locks down completely.
Exactly. And this manifests physically as the somatic experience of softness. Vulnerability triggers acute, measurable physical distress. In therapy, we often see something called dorsal vagal shutdown when they're pushed to be vulnerable.
Dorsal vagal shutdown, what does that feel like?
If a therapist asks them to feel self-compassion, or if a partner tries to hold them while they cry, they don't feel comforted. They might suddenly feel extreme physical heaviness, a sudden inability to speak, emotional numbness, or even literal nausea and dizziness.
Really? Nausea.
Yes. Their body is going into a profound freeze response to protect them from the danger of being cared for.
They are essentially allergic to receiving care. The body is treating empathy like a pathogen.
So, to regulate that overwhelming physical distress, they use hyperindependence as literal armor. They will push the caring person away. They might suddenly pick a fight over nothing, or deflect with a joke, or immediately change the subject to the other person's problems.
I've seen that happen.
Because establishing dominance, control, and isolation feels neurologically safer than enduring the terrifying softness of being held.
Okay, so how on earth do you break out of a prison that your own nervous system has built to protect you? If your brain treats a hug like a knife, how do you heal?
You have to fundamentally rewire the entire system. And this is why traditional talk therapy alone often isn't enough for the strong one. You cannot logic your way out of a survival response.
Right.
You can't just tell the amygdala to calm down. You need somatic therapies, approaches that work from the body upward. Therapies like brain spotting or somatic experiencing bypass the cognitive defenses and work directly with the nervous system.
How do those work?
The goal is to slowly, gently, over a long period of time, teach the brain that being seen does not equal being destroyed.
You have to introduce the concept of safety drop by drop, expanding the capacity to receive.
Yes, it's about expanding what we call the vulnerability resource bot. You have to slowly change the nervous system's core internal operating question from, will I get hurt if I let this person see my weakness, to a new, terrifying, but beautiful question.
Which is?
How good could it possibly feel to actually be supported?
So to truly heal, they have to deliberately, terrifyingly let go of the armor that kept them alive for decades. They have to willingly shatter that one-way mirror. But taking off the armor means they are finally exposed.
Yes, they are.
And when the armor comes off, they have to look at the wounds underneath. What are those wounds actually made of? What is hiding under all that hyper-competence, the color-coded planners, and the flawless advice?
This brings us to the most profound and often the most painful part of our analysis. Beneath the hyper-functioning, beneath the flawlessly managed calendar, beneath the endless problem-solving, is a massive, silent, unacknowledged well of grief. Grief is the hidden engine powering everything we've discussed today.
Grief. That might surprise a lot of people. When we think of grief, we think of funerals. We think of losing a spouse or a parent to death. What are they grieving if nobody has actually died?
They're experiencing a very specific, agonizing type of mourning that clinical literature calls ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss occurs when something is profoundly lost, but there is no physical death, no closure, no funeral, and no clear boundary to the event.
No clear boundary.
For the strong one, this ambiguous loss is twofold.
Let's look at the first fold. What is the first thing they are mourning?
First, they are grieving the loss of their own childhood. They are mourning the version of themselves that never got to exist, the child who never got to be messy, innocent, irresponsible, and carefree. They're grieving the scraped knees they never got comforted for, the tantrums they weren't allowed to throw, And the sheer agony of this grief is that it is an irretrievable loss. No matter how much therapy they do, no matter how much healing they achieve, they can never go back in time and be a cared-for 7-year-old. That timeline is gone forever.
That is a staggering thing to realize. You are mourning a ghost of yourself. And what is the second fold of the ambiguous loss?
The second fold is mourning the fantasy parent.
Fantasy parent.
Every human child is born with an innate evolutionary biological expectation of a caregiver. The brain expects a parent who is bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind, who will protect them from the world.
No way.
The strong one had a parent who was physically present in the house, but psychologically absent, fragile, or destructive. So the adult strong one is grieving the idealized protective parent they fundamentally deserved but never got.
Wow.
They are mourning the gap between what a mother or father should have been and what they actually were.
And society makes this grieving process so much harder, doesn't it? Because if your parent dies, the community rallies. They bring you casseroles. They give you time off work. They acknowledge your pain. But nobody brings you a casserole when you are grieving a childhood you never had.
Precisely. And this leads us to the concept of disenfranchised grief.
Disenfranchised grief.
Grief becomes disenfranchised when society does not recognize, validate, or permit it. Society looks at the strong one and sees their surface level success. They see the promotion, the nice house, the fact that they are the reliable rock of the community.
Right.
And society says, what on earth do you have to be sad about? You're so successful. You have your life so perfectly put together, you can't complain. Your parents did a great job raising such a responsible person.
We literally weaponize their trauma response against their pain. We use their success as proof that they shouldn't be hurting.
We absolutely do. Because society loves, relies on, and heavily rewards the strong one for their relentless achievements and emotional labor, their underlying pain is completely invalidated.
Which just makes it worse.
Much worse. This lack of validation acts as the silent engine of their numbness. Because no one will acknowledge the grief, they push it down further. Pushing it down requires more emotional masking, which requires more cortisol, more top-down cognitive processing, and leads right back to the exhaustion we discussed. It is a vicious, self-sustaining loop.
It creates a permanent state of mourning.
A cycle of complicated mourning. Because there is no funeral for a lost childhood, no culturally accepted ritual for saying goodbye to the parent you deserved but didn't get, the grief freezes in the body.
The grief freezes.
And this frozen grief sustains a secret, deeply unconscious, and highly protective fantasy.
What is the fantasy?
The strong one believes, deep down in their core, in the most hidden part of their inner child, if I am just strong enough, if I anticipate every single need of everyone around me,
Yeah.
if I am perfectly useful, if I endure enough pain and never ever drop the ball, eventually someone will realize how hard I am working. Eventually my competence will be rewarded and a savior will arrive to finally take care of me.
Oh, man. They're performing perfection to earn a retroactive rescue. They are waiting for someone to finally see the one-way mirror, shatter it, and parent them. But that rescue is never going to come, is it?
It isn't. And that is the crux of the healing. Letting go of that false hope, accepting the brutal reality that the magical savior is never going to arrive to retroactively fix their childhood is the most agonizing step in the entire psychological process.
It must feel like a death.
It does. It feels like a death. But it is the absolutely necessary step. They have to stop auditioning for a rescue. They have to become their own savior, drop the armor, and finally allow themselves to grieve the loss.
As we wrap up this incredible, sprawling journey today, I just want to synthesize what we've uncovered because we have covered a massive amount of ground.
We really have.
The strong one in your life, or let's be honest, the strong one in the mirror, isn't just a naturally reliable friend who is good at giving advice. They are a human being operating a nervous system that is trapped in a decades-long state of crisis management.
Exactly.
They are paying an ongoing, incredibly heavy biological and social tax for a childhood environment they never chose, had no control over, and barely survived.
That is the ultimate paradigm shift we need to embrace as a society and as individuals. Healing for the strong one isn't about telling them to take a bubble bath.
Right.
It isn't about generic self-care checklists. It is a profound, terrifying, structural reconstruction of their entire identity. It requires an agonizing shift from being a human doing, whose worth is tied to utility, back into a human being who has inherent worth just for existing.
A human being.
Yes, it requires somatic therapies to rewire the brain
Huh.
to tolerate the physical sensation of being supported.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it requires finally stopping the relentless forward motion long enough to grieve the past.
I want to speak directly to you right now, listening to this.
Yeah.
If you recognize yourself in the shock absorber analogy, if your entire life has been built on proving that you can carry the weight of the world without breaking a sweat, if your identity is hopelessly fused to your utility, what would happen if you just put it down? What if the most courageous, terrifying, and ultimately healing thing you could ever do isn't holding everyone together? What if it's allowing yourself to fall apart just a little bit, letting the people who actually love you see the cracks in the wall, and trusting that you will still be fundamentally worthy of love when you do? Thank you for joining us on this expansive edition of Audio Notebook. We invite you to sit with these concepts, reflect on your own relationships, question the dynamics you've accepted as normal, and perhaps, for the first time in a very long time, finally allow yourself to rest.